Jamal Henderson, a 35-year-old African-American high school teacher, pulled into the grocery store parking lot on a sunny Saturday afternoon. As he searched for a spot, he noticed the place was bustling with activity. Cars wove in and out as people rushed to get their weekend shopping done. Jamal spotted a prime location close to the entrance and carefully eased his car into the space, making sure to park straight between the lines. Just as he opened the door to step out, Jamal heard the unmistakable screech of tires. He looked up and saw a white SUV aggressively pulling up next to him. Inside, a woman's face was twisted with anger. Before she had even fully rolled down her window, she shouted, "Hey! That was my spot." Jamal blinked, startled by her sudden aggression. "Excuse me," he asked calmly, though confusion laced his voice. The woman, now identified as Karen Sullivan, was halfway out of her car. She slammed her door shut and stormed toward him, not bothering to keep her voice down. "I was waiting for that spot," she yelled, jabbing a finger in his direction. "I had my blinker on and everything." Jamal glanced around, his brow furrowed. He hadn't noticed any cars waiting when he parked, and the lane had been clear. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure in the face of her hostility. "I'm sorry, I didn't see you," he said, keeping his voice steady. "The spot was open when I got here." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms, glaring at Jamal as if he had committed a grave offense. "Of course you didn't see me," she scoffed, her tone dripping with disdain. "You people never do you?" Jamal felt a familiar tightness in his jaw, a tension he knew all too well. This wasn't just about a parking spot anymore, it was about the color of his skin. He'd seen this scenario play out before, a minor inconvenience escalating into a full-blown racial confrontation. Inner monologue, "Here we go again," Jamal thought to himself, the weariness of a lifetime of microaggressions weighing on his shoulders. No matter how hard he tried to avoid these situations, they always seemed to find him. He steeled himself, determined not to let her blatant racism get under his skin. "Look," Jamal said, his voice calm but firm, "I apologize if you were waiting for this spot, but I didn't cut you off. The space was empty when I arrived." Karen's face reddened, her anger palpable. She uncrossed her arms and took a step closer to Jamal, invading his personal space. "Listen here," she hissed, her finger pointed at his chest. "I don't care what you think you saw. I was here first, and you stole my spot. Typical of your kind, always thinking you can take whatever you want." Jamal flinched inwardly at her words, the casual racism hitting him like a physical blow. He dealt with this kind of prejudice his entire life, but it never got easier. The insinuation that he was a thief, that his mere presence was an affront to her sensibilities, it was a narrative he knew all too well. Inner monologue, "Breathe," Jamal reminded himself, fighting the urge to lash out at her. Engaging with her hatred would only make things worse. He needed to be the bigger person, even if it meant swallowing his pride. "Ma'am," Jamal said, his tone measured and even, "I don't want any trouble. I'm just here to do my shopping, same as you. Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be." But Karen was beyond reason, her anger fueled by a lifetime of prejudice and entitlement. She stepped even closer, her face mere inches from Jamal's. "Trouble," she spat. "The only trouble here is you. Your kind always brings trouble. I bet you don't even belong in this neighborhood." Jamal's heart raced, his palms sweaty as he tried to maintain his composure. He knew he was fighting a losing battle. No matter what he said or did, Karen had already made up her mind about him. In her eyes, he was nothing more than a stereotype, a threat to her way of life. As the confrontation escalated, Jamal braced himself for what was to come. He knew from experience that situations like these rarely ended well for people who looked like him. But he refused to back down, refused to let her hatred go unchallenged. He would stand his ground, even if it meant facing the consequences. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," Karen snapped, her voice rising with each word. "I've had enough of you people thinking you can do whatever you want. You're all the same, entitled, disrespectful, and thinking the rules don't apply to you." Jamal clenched his fists, taking a deep breath to calm himself. "Ma'am, I'm just here to buy groceries. I don't want any trouble. It's just a parking spot." Karen's face contorted with rage, her eyes blazing with undisguised hatred. "Trouble? You want to talk about trouble? People like you are nothing but trouble. You come into nice neighborhoods like this and ruin everything. I bet you don't even live around here, do you?" Asterisk inner monologue. Jamal felt his temper flare, the accusation stinging more than he cared to admit. How many times had he been judged, his presence questioned, simply because of the color of his skin? He wanted to lash out, to give voice to the anger and frustration bubbling up inside him, but he knew it would only make things worse. Asterisk. Where I live has nothing to do with this, Jamal said, his voice strained but even. I have just as much right to be here as anyone else. Karen scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer. Of course you'd say that. You people always think you're entitled to everything. Well, let me tell you something, you're not welcome here. We don't want your kind in our community. The words hit Jamal like a punch to the gut, the blatant racism leaving him momentarily speechless. He'd faced discrimination before, but the sheer venom in Karen's voice, the unapologetic hatred, was staggering. Asterisk inner monologue. Breathe, Jamal told himself, fighting the urge to react, to let his anger take control. He couldn't let her see how much her words affected him, couldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten under his skin. Asterisk. I understand you're upset about the parking spot, Jamal said, his voice carefully controlled, but there's no need for this kind of language. I'm not trying to cause any problems. Karen let out a harsh laugh, the sound grating and mirthless. You're not trying to cause problems? Just by being here, you're a problem. Your kind always is. She took a step closer, invading Jamal's personal space, her finger jabbing at his chest. Listen closely, because I'm only going to say this once. You don't belong here. You never will. So why don't you do us all a favor and go back to where you came from? Jamal's heart raced, his palms clammy as he tried to maintain his composure. He'd heard those words before, the tired refrain of racists and bigots who saw his very existence as a threat. But hearing them directed at him, in the middle of a grocery store parking lot, was a stark reminder of just how deeply ingrained racism was in society. Asterisk inner monologue. Walk away, Jamal urged himself, his inner voice pleading for restraint. Engaging with her will only make things worse. You can't reason with hatred like this. Asterisk. But before Jamal could respond, Karen's hand shot out, shoving him hard in the chest. He stumbled back, caught off guard by the sudden physical aggression. Don't ignore me when I'm talking to you, boy, Karen hissed, her face inches from his. You think you can just walk away from me? Jamal's shock quickly turned to anger, his fists clenching at his sides. He'd been willing to let her verbal abuse slide, but laying hands on him was a line he couldn't ignore. Do not touch me, Jamal said, his voice low and warning. I haven't done anything to you. Just leave me alone. But Karen was beyond reason, her fury consuming her. She shoved him again, harder this time, sending him staggering back against his car. I'll do whatever I want, she spat, her eyes wild with rage. You don't get to tell me what to do, you filthy. The slur hung in the air between them, the ugliness of it momentarily stunning Jamal into silence. He'd been called names before, had heard every racist epithet imaginable, but it never got easier. Each time, it felt like a knife twisting in his gut, a reminder of how little he meant to people like Karen. Asterisk inner monologue. Jamal closed his eyes for a brief moment, the weight of a lifetime of racism bearing down on him. He was tired, so tired of fighting this battle, of constantly having to prove his worth in the face of blind hatred. But he knew he couldn't let her win, couldn't let her hatred go unchallenged. Asterisk. Enough, Jamal said, his voice steady despite the anger coursing through him. I'm done with this conversation. I'm walking away, and I suggest you do the same. He turned to leave, determined to be the bigger person, to not let Karen's racism drag him down to her level. But as he took a step, he felt a sharp pain explode across the back of his head. He staggered forward, his vision swimming as he tried to regain his balance. Behind him, Karen stood with a triumphant sneer on her face, a rock clutched in her hand. She had grabbed it from the nearby landscaping, and in a rage, had hurled it at Jamal's retreating form. Not so tough now, are you? She taunted, her voice dripping with malice. That's what you get for messing with me. Jamal turned to face her, his hand pressed to the back of his head, his fingers coming away sticky with blood. The pain was intense, but it paled in comparison to the anger and disbelief coursing through him. Asterisk inner monologue. This couldn't be happening. How had a simple trip to the grocery store turned into this? Into a physical assault, into a blatant act of racism and violence. Asterisk. Jamal's mind raced, his heart pounding in his ears. He knew he needed to get away, to put distance between himself and Karen before things escalated even further. But he also knew he couldn't let this go, couldn't let her actions go unpunished. With a shaking hand, he reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You can't just assault someone like that." Karen's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her face before it was replaced with indignant anger. "You're calling the police? On me? I'm the victim here. You attacked me." Jamal shook his head in disbelief, wincing at the pain the movement caused. "I didn't touch you. You're the one who assaulted me. And I have witnesses." He glanced around the parking lot, suddenly aware of the small crowd that had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Some had their phones out, recording the altercation. Others simply watched, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Inner monologue. For a fleeting moment, Jamal felt a surge of hope. Surely, with so many witnesses, with video evidence, there would be no question of what had happened. Surely, justice would be served. But as he looked back at Karen, saw the hatred still burning in her eyes, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. Racism, after all, had a way of twisting the truth, of turning victims into villains and aggressors into martyrs. As he dialed 911, Jamal braced himself for the battle ahead. He knew it would be an uphill fight, that Karen would do everything in her power to paint herself as the victim. But he also knew he couldn't back down, couldn't let her hatred win. For too long, people like Karen had been allowed to spew their venom without consequence. For too long, people like Jamal had been expected to swallow their pride, to turn the other cheek in the face of blatant discrimination. But not today. Today, Jamal would stand his ground. Today, he would fight back. And whatever the outcome, he would know that he had done the right thing, that he had refused to be silent in the face of injustice. The arrival of the police brought a new level of tension to the already charged atmosphere. Jamal watched as two officers approached, their expressions wary as they took in the scene before them. "What's going on here?" the first officer asked, his hand resting on his hip, inches from his holster. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. "This woman assaulted me," he said, gesturing to Karen. "She shoved me and threw a rock at my head. I have witnesses." Karen immediately burst into tears, her demeanor shifting from aggressive to victimized in an instant. "That's not true," she wailed, pointing an accusing finger at Jamal. "He attacked me. I was just defending myself." The officers looked from Jamal to Karen, their expressions skeptical. Jamal's heart sank as he saw the doubt in their eyes, the unspoken assumption that he, the black man, must be the aggressor. Inner monologue. It was a familiar scenario, one that played out all too often. A white woman's tears held more weight than a black man's truth. Jamal knew he would have to fight twice as hard to be believed, to be seen as the victim instead of the villain. "That's not what happened," Jamal said, his voice steady despite the anger and frustration coursing through him. "I have witnesses who can corroborate my story. And there's video evidence." He gestured to the bystanders, some of whom were still recording the interaction. The officers glanced at the crowd, their expressions unreadable. "We'll need to take statements from everyone involved," the second officer said, pulling out a notepad. "And we'll need to see any video footage." As the officers began to interview the witnesses, Jamal felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see his friend and colleague, Marcus, standing beside him, concern etched on his face. "Jamal, I saw what happened," Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. "I've got your back, man. We'll make sure the truth comes out." Jamal nodded, grateful for the support. He knew he would need it in the coming days, as he navigated the legal system and fought to hold Karen accountable for her actions. Inner monologue. Having Marcus by his side was a small comfort in the face of the enormous challenge ahead. Jamal knew that the odds were stacked against him, that the system was rigged in favor of people like Karen. But he also knew that he couldn't let that deter him, couldn't let the fear of failure keep him from seeking justice. As the police continued their investigation, Jamal's mind raced with the possibilities of what lay ahead. He knew that pressing charges against Karen would be an uphill battle, that he would face scrutiny and skepticism at every turn. Inner monologue, but he also knew that he had no choice. He couldn't let Karen's actions go unchallenged, couldn't let her racism and violence go unpunished. He owed it to himself, and to every other person who had ever been targeted because of the color of their skin, to fight back. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and media attention. Karen's assault on Jamal had gone viral, the video footage spreading across social media like wildfire. The public response was divided, with some hailing Karen as a hero standing up against dangerous criminals, while others condemned her actions as a blatant act of racism. Jamal found himself at the center of a national conversation about race and policing, his name and face splashed across headlines and news segments. It was a surreal experience, one that left him feeling exposed and vulnerable. Asterisk inner monologue, but through it all, Jamal remained focused on his goal, holding Karen accountable for her actions. He met with lawyers, gave interviews to the press, and testified in court, all the while knowing that the odds were stacked against him. Asterisk. The trial itself was a grueling experience. Karen's defense team painted her as a frightened woman who had acted in self-defense, twisting the facts to fit their narrative. They brought up Jamal's past, digging up old incidents and arrests from his youth, attempting to paint him as a dangerous criminal. Jamal sat in the courtroom, his jaw clenched as he listened to the lies and half-truths being spun about him. It was a painful reminder of how easily the truth could be distorted, how quickly a victim could be turned into a villain. Asterisk inner monologue, but Jamal refused to let the defense's tactics get to him. He knew the truth, and he had faith that the evidence would speak for itself. He had the video footage, the witness statements, and the medical records documenting his injuries. He had the truth on his side, and that had to count for something. Asterisk. As the trial progressed, Jamal began to see glimmers of hope. The prosecution presented a strong case, methodically dismantling Karen's claims of self-defense. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about the psychological impact of racism, about the ways in which bias and prejudice could lead to violence. And then, in a stunning moment, one of the bystanders who had witnessed the assault took the stand. A white woman in her 50s, she had been one of the first to call 911 after seeing Karen attack Jamal. "What I saw that day was not self-defense," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It was a hate crime, plain and simple. That woman attacked that man because of the color of his skin, and that is unacceptable." Her words hung in the air, a powerful condemnation of Karen's actions. Jamal felt a surge of gratitude and relief, knowing that there were people willing to stand up and speak the truth, even when it was difficult. Asterisk inner monologue, the witness's testimony was a turning point in the trial, a moment when the tide began to shift in Jamal's favor. He could see it in the jury's faces, in the way they leaned forward and listened intently to every word. Asterisk. In the end, the jury found Karen guilty of assault and battery with a hate crime enhancement. The verdict was a stunning victory for Jamal, a vindication of his experience and a powerful statement against racism and bigotry. As he listened to the judge read out the sentence, 5 years in prison and mandatory diversity training, Jamal felt a mix of emotions wash over him. Relief, certainly, and a sense of justice served. But also sadness, and a deep weariness at the knowledge that this was just one small battle in a much larger war. Asterisk inner monologue, the fight against racism was far from over, Jamal knew. There would be other Karens, other incidents of violence and discrimination. But for now, he could take solace in the fact that he had stood up for himself and for what was right. He had shown that the truth still mattered, that justice could still prevail, even in a world that often seemed stacked against him. Asterisk. As he walked out of the courthouse, flanked by his lawyers and supporters, Jamal felt a sense of hope and determination wash over him. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be setbacks and challenges at every turn. But he also knew that he was not alone. He had his family, his friends, and a growing community of people who believed in the power of justice and equality. Together, they would keep fighting, keep pushing for change, until the day when incidents like this were a thing of the past. Asterisk inner monologue, Jamal knew that he might not live to see that day. But he also knew that every battle mattered, that every victory brought them one step closer to a world where the color of a person's skin no longer determined their worth or their safety. Asterisk. As he stepped out into the sunlight, Jamal took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He had won a victory today, but the fight was far from over. There was still work to be done, still hearts and minds to be changed. But for now, he could take a moment to savor the feeling of justice served, of a wrong righted. He could hold his head high, knowing that he had stood up for what was right, and that he had made a difference, however small. And with that knowledge, Jamal walked forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He knew that the road would be long and the fight would be hard. But he also knew that he would never stop pushing for a better, more just world. It was a promise he made to himself, and to all those who had come before him, a promise to keep fighting, no matter what. As Jamal stepped out of the courthouse, his heart heavy but his spirit unbroken, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The victory he had just won felt hollow, like a band-aid on a gaping wound. Asterisk inner monologue, how many more Karens would there be? How many more times would he have to fight this battle, just to be treated with basic human decency? The weight of it all threatened to crush him, to steal the air from his lungs and the hope from his heart. Asterisk. Lost in thought, Jamal didn't notice the figure approaching him until it was too late. A hand grabbed his arm, spinning him around. He found himself face to face with Karen, her eyes wild with rage. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You think this is over?" Jamal's heart raced, his body tensing for a fight. He knew he should walk away, but something in Karen's eyes held him in place. There was a madness there, a hatred so deep and so violent that it chilled him to his core. "Karen, don't do this," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "It's over. The jury found you guilty. Just let it go." But Karen was beyond reason. With a scream of pure rage, she lunged at Jamal, her hands clawing at his face. He stumbled back, trying to fend her off without hurting her. Asterisk inner monologue, this couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. He had just won a victory against racism, against hate. And now, that very same hate was attacking him once again, in broad daylight, in front of the very courthouse where he had just testified. Asterisk. Jamal's mind raced, trying to find a way out of the situation. He couldn't fight back, not without risking everything he had just fought for. But he also couldn't let Karen continue to assault him, to terrorize him with her hatred. Just as he was about to give in to despair, a voice rang out across the courthouse steps. "Get your hands off him." Jamal turned to see Marcus running towards them, his face etched with concern and anger. Behind him, a crowd of onlookers had gathered, their phones out and recording the altercation. Karen froze, her grip on Jamal loosening as she realized the scene she was causing. She stepped back, her eyes darting from Jamal to Marcus to the crowd of witnesses. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You'll pay for this. You'll all pay." And with that, she turned and fled, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could stop her. Jamal stood there, his heart pounding, his mind reeling. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Karen's parting words echoed in his ears, a chilling reminder of the depths of hatred and bigotry that still lurked in the shadows of American society. Asterisk inner monologue, how could he ever truly be free when people like Karen still roamed the streets, their hearts filled with such venom and vitriol? How could he ever feel safe when the very color of his skin made him a target for violence and discrimination? Asterisk. As Marcus reached him, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder, Jamal felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He was tired, so tired of fighting this never-ending battle. But he knew he couldn't give up, couldn't let the Karens of the world win. "You okay, man?" Marcus asked, his voice soft with concern. Jamal nodded, though he couldn't quite bring himself to speak. His throat felt tight, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Asterisk inner monologue, he wasn't okay, not really. How could he be, after everything he had just been through? But he had to keep going, had to keep fighting. For himself, for his community, for all those who had come before him and all those who would come after. Asterisk. As the crowd began to disperse, Jamal took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders and lifting his head high. He had won today, but the fight was far from over. There would be more Karens, more battles to be fought and won. But he would not let that stop him. He would keep marching forward, keep pushing for change, keep demanding justice and equality for all. Because that was the only way forward, the only way to build a better world for himself and for generations to come. Asterisk inner monologue, and so, with a heavy heart but an unbreakable spirit, Jamal stepped out into the world once more. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, what obstacles he would face, or what sacrifices he would have to make. Asterisk. But he did know one thing, he would never stop fighting for what was right. He would never stop believing in the power of truth, in the strength of his convictions, in the basic humanity that bound us all together. Asterisk. And with that knowledge, that unshakable faith in the goodness of the human spirit, Jamal knew that he could face whatever lay ahead. He could weather any storm, overcome any obstacle, and emerge stronger and more determined than ever before. Asterisk because he was not alone. He had his family, his friends, his community. He had the weight of history on his side, the legacy of all those who had fought and bled and died for the cause of justice and equality, asterisk. And with them at his back, with their strength and their courage and their love, Jamal knew that he could move mountains. He could change the world, one heart and one mind at a time, asterisk. And so, he stepped out into the sunlight, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Ready to keep fighting, keep pushing, keep believing in the power of love and justice and truth, asterisk. Ready to build a better world, for himself and for all those who would come after him. A world where the color of a person's skin no longer determined their worth, their safety, or their place in society, asterisk. A world where every child could grow up free and equal and loved, no matter who they were or where they came from. A world worth fighting for, no matter the cost or the sacrifice. And with that vision burning bright in his heart, Jamal took his first step forward into the unknown and the uncertain, but also into the possible, the hopeful, and the infinitely beautiful. In the days and weeks that followed, Jamal's story spread like wildfire. The video of Karen's attack outside the courthouse went viral, sparking a national conversation about the ongoing prevalence of racism and the urgent need for change. Jamal found himself thrust into the spotlight, his face and name splashed across headlines and social media feeds. He was hailed as a hero by some, a symbol of resistance and resilience in the face of bigotry and hate. But for Jamal, the attention was bittersweet. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted to become a public figure or a spokesperson for a cause. He had simply wanted to live his life in peace, to be treated with the same respect and dignity as anyone else. Inner monologue, and yet, he knew that his story was important. That by speaking out, by refusing to be silent in the face of injustice, he could make a difference. He could inspire others to stand up, to fight back, to demand change, And so, Jamal embraced his new role. He gave interviews, spoke at rallies, and shared his experiences with anyone who would listen. He talked about the toll that racism had taken on his life, the constant fear and anxiety that came with being a black man in America. But he also talked about hope, about the power of community, of solidarity, of love. He spoke about the beauty and resilience of his people, the strength and courage that had carried them through centuries of oppression and struggle. And slowly but surely, things began to change. Laws were passed, policies were reformed, and attitudes began to shift. It wasn't perfect, and there was still so much work to be done. But for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt a glimmer of hope. Inner monologue, he knew that the fight was far from over. That racism was a disease that had infected every aspect of American society, from the criminal justice system to the economy to the very fabric of daily life, But he also knew that change was possible. That by working together, by building coalitions and alliances across lines of race and class and gender, they could create a better world for all, As the months passed, Jamal's life began to return to a sense of normalcy. He went back to teaching, back to the work that he loved. But he never forgot the lessons that he had learned, the scars that he carried with him. And he never stopped fighting. He continued to speak out, to organize, to build power in his community. He mentored young people, teaching them about their history and their culture, instilling in them a sense of pride and purpose. And slowly but surely, he began to see the fruits of his labor. He watched as his students graduated from high school and went on to college, breaking cycles of poverty and oppression that had held their families back for generations. He saw new leaders emerge, young activists who were unafraid to challenge the status quo and demand a better future for all. And he felt a sense of pride and purpose, knowing that he had played a small part in making that future possible. Inner monologue, looking back on his life, Jamal knew that he had been through hell. He had faced discrimination and hatred, violence and trauma, pain and loss that would have broken a lesser man, But he had also known love. He had known the fierce, unbreakable bonds of family and community, the joy and laughter and strength that came from being part of something larger than himself, And he knew that, in the end, that love was what truly mattered. It was what had carried him through the darkest moments of his life, what had given him the courage and the hope to keep going, even when all seemed lost, As Jamal sat on his porch, watching the sun set over his neighborhood, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that the struggle was far from over, that there would always be more work to be done. But he also knew that he was not alone. That he was part of a movement, a community, a legacy that stretched back generations and would continue long after he was gone. And with that knowledge, that unshakable faith in the power of unity and love, Jamal knew that anything was possible. That together, they could build a world where every child could grow up safe and loved, where every person could live with dignity and respect, where the color of one's skin no longer determined the course of one's life. It would not be easy, and it would not happen overnight. But Jamal knew that it was a dream worth fighting for, a vision worth dedicating his life to. And so, as the last rays of sunlight faded into the horizon, Jamal closed his eyes and smiled. He knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, that there would be setbacks and challenges at every turn. But he also knew that he was ready. Ready to keep fighting, keep loving, keep believing in the power of change. Ready to build a better world, one day at a time. If you found this story meaningful and would like to continue to receive similar content, please hit subscribe to follow the channel and don't forget to ring the bell to never miss any of our future videos. Thank you for watching and supporting us.